My city has an overwhelming amount of traffic light performers. In case you're not familiar with South American culture, most major cities like Sao Paulo and Bogota house skilled artists that could very well be in a circus, except for the fact that they are dirt poor and rely on being seen while people are stuck in traffic. They'll give you a pocket show and then expect to get some loose change. This is their precarious yet very interesting only source of income. I always tipped them because they really made a busy workday a little more bearable. On my way to the office and back, I saw all sorts of performers, from simple juggling with oranges to eating fire. Most of them were young men, some were teenagers, barely out of childhood. Being a softie, I always gave these the best tips, even if their numbers weren't the best. Call them beggars if you want, but to me there's something particularly dignified and almost mystical about what they do. I became acquainted with most of these young lads to the point of even feeling safer when they're around. Being mugged in a red light is a sadly common event in my country, especially for a woman alone in her car after 8 p.m. There was only one guy that never said anything. Hell, he never performed anything too. He just extended his gloved hands or sometimes knocked on your window. People called him the Pumpkinman. Pumpkinman was the embodiment of Halloween all year round, a welcoming change in a country where the magical, fun foreign custom wasn't adopted. He wore old tattered clothes in shades that had one day been bright purple, grimy white gloves, and a big pumpkin as a cask covering his whole head. The way he walked was strange, rigid, like the scarecrow of Oz. Everyone always looked down on him, either to laugh or to say he looked disgusting, but I pitied him. He seemed like a good man who was mentally ill. It was almost by chance that I found him all beaten down in the street. My new boyfriend at the time, Lucas, lived in a whole different area, so I took the subway to go to see him, since the route wasn't worth driving. On an alley between the station and Lucas's apartment lay the pitiful figure of the Pumpkinman, his limbs all stretched across some trash bags. I texted Lucas to come so we could get him some help. If Lucas thought that the Pumpkinman was disgusting or scary, he didn't say it. "We should get him to the hospital, Gabby." "He's a homeless person, babe. I don't think he has an ID," I replied. "In my country, despite the free healthcare, you need certain documents to be admitted to a hospital." He lied there, unconscious, in the garbage. This was no way to go. "Can we take him to your place and patch him up?" Lucas seemed worried, but, even more than me, he couldn't see a person in need of help without helping them. He sighed and put the Pumpkinman on his shoulder. "He's strangely light," he remarked. As soon as we entered Lucas's apartment, the Pumpkinman woke up. His body language said he was scared, but as soon as he saw me, he seemed relieved and shyly waved. "Can you talk?" I asked. The Pumpkinman shook his head no. "Are you hurt?" "Yes." "Are you bleeding somewhere?" "Yes." We looked around but didn't find any blood. Instead, his clothes were covered in a sticky orange liquid. "What about you take a shower, bud?" Lucas suggested. Although the Pumpkinman didn't smell, it was probably good to get a fresh change of clothes and let us see his wounds. "No." "Can you shower?" "No." "It's fine then, just take off your pumpkin and sleep here tonight," Lucas offered. He had put a cheap mattress in the living room. Pumpkinman frenetically shook his head no, seeming scared. "What's the matter? Is it about sleeping here?" "No." Tears starting falling from the carved eyes. "Could it be that this is your real head?" "Yes." We let the Pumpkinman rest. The two of us, however, couldn't sleep a wink, talking about the strange creature. We concluded that he was harmless and promised each other that this secret was safe with us. But we really didn't know what else we could do for him. The next morning the Pumpkinman looked awful. The mattress was covered in the orange liquid that seemed to be his blood, and that pumpkin head of his was darkened by rot. Whoever beat him meant to kill him, probably for finding out too that he wasn't human. "Can you recover from this?" I asked softly. He shook his head no. "What can we do for you?" Lucas asked then. The Pumpkinman looked around, then walked to a small flower pot and grabbed a bit of dirt with the tip of his gloved fingers. "We bury you?" "Yes." "Okay, so after you die He vehemently shook his head no. "We have to bury you now?" "Yes." Being a city woman, the only place I could think of was my parents' small farm. The trip only took 2 hours, and Lucas, the Pumpkinman, and I didn't talk too much. I wanted to bomb him with questions, but at the same time I didn't even know what to ask. "Will you be alright?" He gestured as if to say, "I don't know." "Are there others like you?" "I don't know." The Pumpkinman helped us dig his own grave, a relatively shallow one, and solemnly lied in it, waving goodbye in a way that seemed almost happy. We covered him with dirt until there was no vestige of a humanoid being there. It could have been all there was to it. It was the end of my story, but not of his. As the years went by, the soil became incredibly fertile. No matter what kind of seed you would put in there, the crops would be bountiful. This year it marks 15 years since we buried him. My teenage niece, Carol, who was born on the farm, decided to confide something to me. On the nearby farm there was a far older man who was always creepy towards her. She never said anything because both my sister and my parents were friends with him, and she thought that she was just imagining things. She just didn't feel comfortable and safe around the guy. One day when she was alone, playing on her portable video game under a tree, he forcefully grabbed her arm with one hand, covering her mouth with the other. Her switch lied forgotten in the dirt as she was dragged somewhere more hidden. As Carol wept in silence, knowing very well what awful fate waited for her in the next few seconds, a shadow covered the sun. A tall man in brilliant purple clothes, immaculate white gloves, and a beautiful carved pumpkin covering his head easily grabbed the rapist by the neck and squeezed it using only one hand. Pumpkinman didn't say anything, but gestured for Carol to escape. The glorious savior then put the rapist inside his outstanding robes. He thrashed, screamed, and choked on his own blood, but soon there was only silence. Pumpkinman then started making his way back to wherever he came from and empathetically waved to Carol as he left. After asking multiple times if she was fine, I told my niece my part of the story. I was happy and relieved to discover Pumpkinman's real form, a giant, magnificent guardian that gets up from the dirt when others need help. A being that's kind but merciless when it comes to evil people. Somehow it feels really fitting, and now I wonder, somewhat delighted, what happened to the man who beat him near death in that alley?